Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered Parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the interview.
Today we are joined by one of the 12 senators in Queensland, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Francis. Thank you for the invitation. How did you come up with a donkey vote? Is that to educate people about politics?
Yes. I was thinking of a name for the podcast about 12 months ago, and I was like, well, what's a quite a interesting sounding name that a lot of people can resonate. And the donkey vote was I think most people know what a donkey vote is basically just voting one through to the 1, 2, 3, 4 down the ballot paper. But yeah, I think it was a name that kind of resonated a lot with politics. And it's kind of a way, I guess, to try and how would I put it? Like to try and educate young people, about the importance of voting, not doing a donkey vote all the time, because at the end of the day, these are, you're electing elected officials who are going to be representing you in their capacity. So you want to be trying to get the best officials that you can. You don't want to be just voting down the ballot paper, especially if the Greens are at the top of the ballot paper.
Yeah, exactly. And, the thing that's caused our country to be in a mess, particularly the last 4 years, is the fact that the people, including myself, have largely been apathetic and not involved in politics. So I want to commend you for getting involved in politics and for getting more people involved. So, I only became involved as a volunteer back in 2008, and it was accidental in a way, but we'll talk about that. But most people have no interest in politics, and that means politics takes an interest in them.
Exactly. So just before we get into the questions, Malcolm, could you give us a little brief description of yourself, just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you?
Okay, well, brief description. I was born in India in 1955, came to Australia when I was 6 or 7. I tend not to focus on the past. I tend to look at the future. So I don't know whether I was 6 or 7. But
A long time ago.
Yeah, that's right. Hey. So went to primary school started in India with a Montessori school under some Catholic nuns. And I really appreciate that introduction to life through Montessori. Then conventional state primary schools here in New South Wales, high school in New South Wales, and then Brisbane Grammar School in Brisbane for secondary school, university in Newcastle to start with, then moved to Queensland University. Later worked as an underground coalface miner at the coalface, literally underground. And then what did I do? That's right. I got a job in the States with a very large company, and then another job after that with another second largest company in the world on coal mining. And the contradictions between the two were startling. I learned a lot from that. Then, I was absolutely in awe of America, and that this is 40 years ago. America, it's not so much in awe now that I know so much more about it, but it was just amazing. So I couldn't leave the joint without traveling. So I traveled for 15 months, did the usual Aussie thing, traveled and then went broke, and then sold the car and bought a plane ticket home, and then worked in management ranks. And then I decided that the bean counters were wrecking the joint. So I decided to get an MBA from the University of Chicago. So back to America, graduated there, had some job offers in the States, but was headhunted back to head up Australia's largest underground coal mining project. And that was just too good an opportunity to pass up. And so we did a lot of innovative things there. Then I went out on my own after a few years and worked as a consultant, improving people's companies and productivity and leadership. And then I got sucked into fighting this climate fraud. And that meant that I was a volunteer for about 8 years, much to my wife's concern. But that got me into politics. that was never my intention, but that's what happened. And then I've been a senator since 2016, apart from being knocked out with dual citizenship, which even though I was the only one not a dual citizen at the time, but I didn't comply with it technically at the time of nomination. And then 2019 at the next election, so I sat out a year and a half, and then the next election I got back in. So I must have done a few things right in the short time I was in the parliament, and now I'm still in the parliament with
And
One
that's
Nation.
quite interesting.
But
With One Nation, yeah, you're one of the two One Nation MPs. I think most people would probably know your colleague in the Senate, I'd assume.
Yeah, I think they know Pauline Hanson as the redhead with incredible talent. She's just stunning to work with. She's so direct, and she loves it when I'm direct back to her. We have discussions about issues. She's an extremely good listener, and I'm told that I'm a good listener too. So we take respect for each other and from each other, and we listen to people, because Pauline got into politics because she served the people of Ipswich so well as a councillor. And then she got such a reputation for fighting fearlessly for her constituents, and so she's a wonderful role model. She doesn't micromanage. She lets us go. If she doesn't agree with something, she'll come and have a talk with me, and then she says, it's up to you what you want to do, but here's some of my advice, she says. And she's got very, very good political acumen, probably the best politician, best political now since Joh Bjelke-Petersen, or maybe John Howard too. She's an exceptional person to work for, highly intelligent. I'm sure we'll talk more about her later.
For sure. So I think we'll now get straight into our questions for you, Senator. So my first question to you is, and I know you did briefly touch on it, how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share?
High school, I went to Curry High School, which is in the Hunter Valley, state school for the first year. And then my father sent me to Brisbane Grammar School, which is a private school. And, the thing I remember from that was that my feet hardly touched the ground. Some kids got homesick, and I think I had about 30 seconds homesickness twice in the first year, and that was it. I just was so excited because I was with a lot of other kids. I'd spent a lot of time in India, of course, and lived on a coal mine in the bush. So it was just wonderful to have so many organized activities around us. I loved playing rugby union, and I became house captain of the boarding house. Boarding house had about 150 people, his students, and I was appointed captain of the boarding house, and we did a lot of innovative things, changed the boarding house quite dramatically just from that perspective. But high school was wonderful. I got pretty good grades, got a Commonwealth scholarship to university back in those days. And university, first year at Newcastle, I loved playing rugby union. I was, I think, 17 or 18. Yeah, it must have been 17. So I was a year behind, a year younger than all the other first year students at Newcastle. But I played open football, and I played first grade football, and Newcastle was a pretty strong competition, played first grade football, and even though I could have played under 19. Then I came up to Queensland. I was very sad to leave Newcastle. University was small and very collegiate, a lot of good friends. And Queensland Uni, I graduated with an honours degree. But good memories of University of Queensland too, good mates there. I spent 18 months or so at Union College, which was a co-ed college, residential college, and then realised I'd be going home, and I spent a lot of my time as a high school student at a boarding school. So I went home and spent the last 18 months at home, and then went into the bush as a coal-face miner. So yeah, that's very good memories of university, and also of the boarding school. I think the boarding school gave me a lot of freedom to be creative and to do what basically to use my initiative, and so that was very rewarding.
Yeah. And just to touch on your life in university and high school. Did that sort of political interest appear at that stage in your life, or were you completely like ambivalent towards politics and you didn't really have an opinion on things back then, and your opinion kind of came about, later on in life?
My father and mother were pretty strong. They weren't liberals, but they were liberal voters, and they took they took an interest in politics as a citizen. Not so much they didn't join a party or get involved in the vote in the supporting candidates or anything like that, but they were acutely aware of what was going on in the world. Although I've recognized some of those things were wrong. So I naturally gravitated towards that side. There is a saying, I'm sure you're aware, Francis, that if you're not a socialist when you're in your teens and early 20s, then you haven't got a heart. And if you're not a capitalist or free enterprise person, once you get to 30, then you haven't got a brain. So I was never a socialist. It just never appealed to me at all. I could see the fundamental contradictions with human behavior. Human behavior is inherently about improving our life, inherently about freedom and using our innovation initiative. So that's always been my thought. But I was interested in politics, but I didn't take a interest in terms of joining a party or anything like that. I remember having lots of debates at the pub on Friday nights at the RE in Brisbane, or the Regatta Hotel with a socialist who was my best friend at uni, and we used to fight like cats and dogs. But we would always have a good debate.
And that's important at the end of the day, because if we stop talking to each other and we stop having those sort of debates with each other, that's the end of democracy and the end of society in general. And what's sadly coming true is that a lot of people are, I guess, and Tobias probably as well as seen this at university, is a lot of students who are really just focused on that one sort of view, that really left-wing socialistic sort of view. And there's not really anyone at universities, not many people at least, who can contradict that and combat that sort of view. And what you're getting is a lot of people who are on one side of politics dominating a university, and it's quite a lonely place for someone like me and Tobias who have more center right to right leaning views in university, and it's quite a difficult time.
Well, it certainly is. I'd mention two things in response to what you said. First of all, I'd agree with you. Secondly, the universities currently are showing a lot of young people in America, especially. When I say a lot, there's strong energy, not big in numbers, but strong energy, enthusiasm for the free market ideals and individual initiative and responsibility. The Austrian School of Economics, for example, a lot of people understand that. Well, not a lot, but I mean, it's strongly understood. And we've got pockets of it in the universities here in Queensland, and I suspect around the country. So it is there. There's a very powerful initiative towards those things. But the other thing is that you're in a university that has been university system that has been woke and under indoctrination for decades. So when I went through university, I graduated in 76. What's that? That's almost 50 years ago. And
50 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so we thought it was pretty left-leaning. I don't like the term left and right. I prefer the term control versus freedom, because that left and right is meant to confuse people. But in the standard sense of the word left, the university was definitely left-wing back then. On the control side of politics, they liked socialism, which is ultimately about control over humans. And it's become chronically bad now. But people don't even know they're indoctrinated. And in the days decades ago, when a coup d'état occurred, if someone pointed a gun at your head, Francis, everyone could see that they were controlling you. But now, if they indoctrinate you from when you're just this long as a baby, and literally that's what's going on, and they indoctrinate teachers, and the teachers indoctrinate the primary, the high school, the tertiary, then you don't even know you're being controlled. And that's the really sad thing. That offends me as a human.
It really does. And I think Tobias is going to say talk about some experiences, because I know he's had some quite interesting experiences with the socialists on campus at his university.
It's been a bit rough, but they sometimes come up to me and like tell me what's going on. I'm like, can you like stop bothering me? And then they keep on coming at me like each day, and I'm like, so I try to avoid them now. I've like taken a specific route to uni that goes past them.
And I think you were telling me as well one time that, they even, they disrupt, they go into, the library on
Yeah,
campus and, they do protests in there while people are actually trying to study and, get their work done. And, the university doesn't really stop them from doing whatever they want.
yeah,
Yes, and
yeah.
you can see the protests on campus right now, many campuses. But the important thing to understand, I only learnt this when I was in my 30s. Always beneath control, there is fear. They are afraid of your argument. That's why they try to dominate and shut you down. They don't want you to speak. They won't engage in a sensible argument with you. That best friend I was telling you about at university, we used to argue like cats and dogs at the pub, and anywhere we were in the same college. He's woken up to himself and he's no longer a socialist. He understands. But
Is he a One Nation voter?
yeah, yes, he is. He's
Oh,
become One Nation. He used to be Labor Party. I used to rib him about that. But you know, when people try to shut you down by either ignoring you or by talking over you or by trying to intimidate you or trying to smear you, it means they're afraid of you because they're all forms of control. And so that's what they're doing. So take heart in that, Tobias, because they're afraid of your argument. They cannot counter your argument. So that's why they try to dominate and suppress. And that's a natural inclination of the control side of politics because they're afraid of their own lack of understanding of their blind adherence to their belief rather than to facts and data.
exactly. And I think now we'll move on to our second question there, Malcolm. And this is from Tobias and kind of relates a bit more to your career after high school. And you did briefly touch on this in your introduction and in previous questions.
Yeah. You know, my
So,
question is,
oh, sorry.
you can go first.
Okay. To answer your question, when I left high school, I left a boarding school in Queensland, in Brisbane, and moved back to the Hunter Valley and was getting ready to go to university at Newcastle, which is
Yeah.
at the mouth of the Hunter Valley. We lived in Cessnock, which had a long, proud mining history. And I decided over the summer holidays to get a job. So I worked in a vineyard, and that was a really interesting experience. I worked with very, what do you call, very bare bones people in the vineyard. It was the second biggest vineyard in the Hunter Valley, and where the other vineyards had many, many workers, we had a very hardworking English woman, a strong tractor operator who didn't like to get off the tractor, and a 60-year-old man who'd retired from the mines, and myself. And we were given tasks to do that most vineyards would do with machines, and we had to do them by hand. So it was pretty hard work, but it was very rewarding, and I enjoyed the camaraderie with just such a small group. So I learned there about a manager who managed the vineyard. What he used to do was sit in his house, which and the vineyard was in a valley, so he could see over the whole valley. And we were all pretty good workers. And he would come down and grab a mattock, grab a hoe rather, and really hoe into the work for 15, 20 minutes and leave exhausted. And he was basically telling us, that's the way I want you to work. So you can't work like that for 8 hours a day. So, I mean, all four of us were pretty good workers, and very good workers, I would say, very strong work ethic. So I learned that he didn't understand what we were doing. I learned that he didn't understand the actual task. I learned that he didn't understand the need to provide proper tools. He was trying to run the place on a shoestring, and it was costing him a lot of money to do so. So I learned that a manager, my father was very strong on this, a manager is not the boss of the people. The manager is to serve the people. He didn't grow any. when I was a coal mine manager, I didn't get any coal out of the ground, but I enabled the people underground to get coal out of the mine. And the better I did my job in serving them, the better they performed and the better the mine went. The safer the mine, the higher the productivity. And part of that service is providing self-discipline to that very small group of people who can't provide adequate self-discipline themselves. So what I'm saying is you don't let standards go by letting people do whatever you want, whatever they want, but you work out with them how to best do the job and then help them and support them to do that. And if someone steps out of line, well, you don't run away from it, you face up to it and hold them accountable. So it's not about being lax, it's about being supportive, because if you let someone break the rules, then someone could get killed in an underground coal mine. And in addition, then if you let it go, everyone starts breaking the rules. So that's pandemonium. So you have to stand up, but it is at heart recognizing that a manager, a chief executive, is there to serve people.
They're not there for their own self-interest. They are there to serve, the people below them and trying to get the best out of the workplace. Because at the end of the day, as you said, if someone is, if a manager is, they're self-serving and not really helping out the people below them, the productivity of the business is going to deteriorate.
Right, and it shows particularly in two ways, not only directly as you just implied, Francis, but it also shows in that the people look to the senior person to find out what he or she is focused on, and they tend to do the same thing. If they see and recognize and realize that the senior person is not focused on the job, doesn't really care about the corporation nor about the people, they then lose motivation. So they think, what's the point? So, if you want to make sure your company serves customers better than anyone else, you have to look after your staff better than anyone else. And that means also standing up to some staff every now and then who become wayward, which is not usually the case. But what I've learned, I've worked on an exchange in China back when I think it was 1987, which was not long after China made connection with the West. I've been to Korea, I've been to Japan, I lived in India, I've visited coal mines in Britain, I've worked in every state of this country, I've worked in the United States, I've been in Canada, I've been in Asia. And the thing that comes through is that people are wonderful. And the majority of people want to contribute, they want to work hard, and they get satisfaction out of being allowed to work hard and contribute, and the management gets out of their damn way or supports them. And so humans are absolutely wonderful. We've got our control freaks, which we might talk about later, but the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Pol Pots, the Mao Zedongs, the Morrisons, the Palaszczys, the Andrews, the Dan Andrews of the world. But the majority are absolutely wonderful. And unfortunately in our society, humans are put down, disrespected, and there's a reason for that, and a deliberate, calculated reason for that. And politics is infected with it, and it hurts our country enormously, hurts humanity enormously. So what I learned was that humans are absolutely wonderful. Because I've worked with them, I could see what they were putting up with underground at the coalface. Managements that were quite often incompetent or just disinterested or just didn't give a damn. So I could see the importance of having a manager that focused, a chief executive that focused on serving the people.
And as you were saying, you did give some examples there of some sort of politicians who are quite control freaks, and I think some of our viewers out there will probably recognize a couple of those names from recent history. Do you think in general, a lot of the politicians now, do you think there's a whole new generation of politicians who are quite more controlling than they were in the past? Or do you think there's always that sort of personality type that, makes a politician a bit more controlling than, someone else in history?
Well, they say that the percentage of psychopaths amongst different groups is highest amongst chief executive officers. But many chief executive officers are wonderful. They're managing directors. They lead their companies extremely well. But then you get psychopaths there. And always, our human experience, humans care. We really do care. And the evidence of that is the fact that I can see you. You exist. When you and I were born, we were about so long, and we were completely helpless. When a foal is born, it plops out of the mare, its mother, lands on the ground and stumbles around for 20 minutes and then starts cantering. I mean, it's ready to go. And then it just puts its head down and starts munching grass beside its mother, and the whole herd keeps moving on, walking. We need care for, we're so vulnerable, completely dependent. Unlike that foal, we're dependent for many, many years. So the fact that you're actually sitting in front of me, albeit on a computer screen, shows that you survived that period, which shows that someone cared for you. So humans are wonderfully caring. Humans are also wonderfully resilient, and they have very strong reasoning ability. And that reasoning ability, I think, gets sometimes a little bit confused, and we start making value judgments, unlike other animals. And we start making value judgments, and that corrupts our thinking and our approach to things, because we start being interested in separation. And you're Francis, whether you're good or bad, you're separate from me. Whereas we're really quite, we both have reasoning skills, we both have care. I'm not explaining it very well, but humans are wonderfully caring, and they're wonderfully capable. And yet we have been indoctrinated in our society to say that's not true. So that's been a big focus of mine. I'm very, very pro-human, and the politicians fall into that space where many politicians enter politics because they care. But when they get into the system, they're working largely for two big parties. Or now a growing party is the Greens Party. So you've got Labor, the Liberal Nationals, and the Greens. And unfortunately, what happens in politics and what happens in government, Francis, is that government has become a tool for corporations and parasitic billionaires to milk the system, to get a lot of easy cash, get control for their own operations, their own sake. So government has become blind. It's become both Labor Party and Liberal Party, sadly, are almost identical. Their policies are almost identical. Literally, I can go through them and explain that. But so what happens is the majority of politicians do what they're told to do. They go in there thinking they'll serve the country, but in the end, they start serving the party. And the French philosopher Simone Weil wrote a book about it, on the abolition of parties. And she points out that in large parties, the objective is not to do what's in the national interest. The objective is to grow the party and to protect the party. And sadly, what we see is many politicians now in the Labor Party and Liberal Party can't tell you how they make their minds up, because they don't make up their minds. They're told how to vote. And if they don't vote that way, they lose their pre-selection. That applies particularly in the Labor Party, where there's a strong understanding that if you cross the floor, you're gone. In the Liberal Party,
as we saw recently as well with Senator Payman,
yes,
that held true. As maybe some of our viewers may not entirely know, Senator Payman crossed the floor on a bill for pro-Palestinian statehood, and went against the Labour caucus, and her whip was removed, and she's now sitting as an independent. So it's ever so real that you don't really see many politicians like that nowadays, who are standing up for their beliefs, because a lot of the time they, as you were saying, they just follow party lines and become self-serving towards the party.
Right, and I have very little respect for the Labor Party. It's got some intelligent people in it. Penny Wong's very astute, some others, but largely they're told what to do. Well, no, entirely told what to do, and they don't dare cross the floor. I've spoken against the climate fraud very strongly in the Senate on many occasions, and quite often I'll be walking back to my room afterwards, and strong Labor people will come up to me and say, "Well done, mate, keep going," because they can see the damage the climate fraud and the energy policies are doing to workers. And some people in the Labor Party are still in favor of workers. The majority aren't. They're no longer the party of the workers. But what I was getting to was that even the good ones will not stand up. Now, on the Liberal Party, the only difference is with the Liberal Party, a few will. So you'll have on some issues, on a few issues, you'll have a few standing up and willing to cross the floor. For example, people like Alex Antic, Jared Rennick, Craig Kelly when he was in the Liberal Party, George Christensen before he came to One Nation. So we had But then what you find is that the good ones like Eric Abetz, Connie Fierravanti Wells are punished and removed from pre-selection. Jared Rennick's just lost his third spot on the ticket, which tells you all you need to know about the Liberals. The Liberals are not interested in looking after good members. They're interested in people they can control. And now the Liberal Party is much like the Labor Party in that there are factions involved and they vote along factional lines. So it's very sad, but the Liberals are no longer the Liberals.
And just quickly, I know we are running out a little bit of time on this Zoom meeting, and I think we can, structure something out afterwards. I just wanted to say also, Senator, do you normally prefer to work with the Labour Party more or the Liberal Party more as a crossbench senator? Because you don't get that you get that opportunity to really work with both sides on a lot of bills. I'm seeing as you're not part of one of the two major parties in the Senate.
Well, I agree with Pauline in that we are happy to work with anyone. We have worked at times with the Greens, and I detest the Greens party. They detest their ideology. It's anti-human. It's anti-environment. It is an absolute disgrace. But some of the Greens, on some issues, are quite good. On some financial matters, they're hopelessly socialistic and they're lost. But on other financial integrity issues, controlling the banks, for example, or harnessing or reining in the banks, they can be quite good. In holding the military to account, the Defense Department account, David Shoebridge does a good job. So he and I work together on that. So I'm not opposed. I will work with anyone who's working in the national interest. And if they're not working in the national interest, I'll call them out and slap them around verbally. So that's just the way we operate, Pauline and I. So do I prefer to work with the Labor Party or the Liberal Party? A very good friend of mine who introduced me to One Nation, he actually told me many years ago, and he still maintains it to this day, being in the Labor Party and the Liberal Party is similar. They're both floating down the river towards a massive waterfall that's going to destroy them. And the only difference is that in the Liberal Party, they're rowing. In the Labor Party, they're in a speedboat with a motor. And they're both heading for taking our country down the gurgler, but the Labor Party is doing it faster. There is, and as I said a little while ago, there are some people in the Liberal Party who will think for themselves. So in answer to your question, I prefer working with the Liberals.
And as someone who is a Liberal member, I take that as a good point because as I said, I think I previously told you as well as Senator that I'm a Liberal member in the party. But yeah, I think in general as well that whole notion around how Labor is in terms of having to vote down caucus lines and maintaining the whip is quite detrimental towards that party because as you see a lot of Labor members when they retire, when they leave politics, they become a lot more right leaning in terms of their views. I think I forgot the name of one of the Labor ministers, I think under the Keating government, who was firmly against the voice to Parliament and went against his entire party. You really do see that a lot because I think a lot of Labour members in general, they are really forced to vote a certain way in Parliament. And when they get out and they really realize that what they did in Parliament was completely wrong and it was completely stupid, they start to own up to their views and actually develop decent opinions on things.
Well, yes, Jenny George comes to mind. She was ACTU secretary, I think, before she went into Parliament. She did speak up a little bit in Parliament, but now she's become an avid campaigner against the Labor Party's climate and energy policies, particularly the energy policies. Martin Ferguson was another one, ACTU secretary who went into the Labor Party, became a minister. He speaks out against the energy policies. But at the same time, there are Liberal National Party members who don't believe the climate fraud, but they still speak in favour of it and support of it, and they still speak for net zero. Peter Dutton, the leader of the Liberal Party, has recently come up with a nuclear policy, which we would say, welcome, Peter, that we've been talking about the need to get rid of the nuclear ban for many, many years in One Nation. So we welcome that, but don't introduce it as confirmation of the need to get to net zero, because the net zero is bullshit. And so the Liberal Party, I know many people don't believe the climate fraud line, but they push it. And some strong skeptics, but Barnaby Joyce, for example, prior to Malcolm Turnbull becoming the head of the Liberal Party, he was arguably the most colourful, most effective speaker against the climate fraud. And yet he took $400 million as an election bribe from Malcolm Turnbull to the farmers in New England for installing wind and solar. $400 million is almost $500 million. And someone said to him, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, you know how it is. You start over here and you move, and then you eventually move, the two sides move in the middle. Well, that's rubbish. Science doesn't work that way. That's the way politics works. So now Barnaby, we've been embarrassing him, calling him out, and he recognizes that it's damaging the country. So now he's talking more about the way he used to talk about the climate fraud. But he's been compromised. And similarly, Matt Canavan, he's a skeptic. He doesn't believe in this rubbish. He doesn't believe in net zero. So they're highly intelligent. We know that they know the climate fraud is crap, yet they both came out in support of cutting carbon dioxide from human activity. And they both came out and spending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars on net zero. Now they're both opposed to net zero, but the damage has been done because it's easy to get a Greens MP to speak in favor of doing something about carbon dioxide from human activity. But when you get a Liberal or a National Party member who's been opposed to it suddenly change because they become ministers, then that does enormous damage to the opposing side. So anyway, it's good to see Matt and Barnaby starting to swing back away from the climate fraud, but it was very disconcerting to see two highly intelligent, highly effective politicians drift off and then come back.
Totally agree with you there, Senator. Totally agree. So yeah, I think we'll move on now back to our next question for you, Senator, and this is relating a little bit more to your career as a coalface engineering minor. So after completing your university degree in mechanical engineering, I believe at University of Queensland, you began working as a coalface engineer and a mining engineer for nearly 6 years. How was your experience working in the mines overall, and how do you think the mining industry has changed since the time you were working in the mines in the 1980s?
Okay, one correction is that I was a graduate in mining engineering, not mechanical engineering, but that's fine. We studied in the room next to each other, mining and mechanical, all part of the engine. Then when I graduated, I decided I better go and learn something. I'd worked in the Christmas holidays, the summer vacation in the mines, and I loved it. But I also recognized that we weren't taught anything like that at university. And so I think I was the only one we had a small graduation class, but I was the only one who went into the mines to work as a coalface miner rather than work as an engineer in an office. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Do you think that was just seeing as, a lot of people who study, coal mining and, that sort of, because it's more related towards, it's not mechanical engineering, it's more towards the mining, engineering study. Do you think a lot of people aren't really interested in going into the coal mining and actually, being a miner and are more interested more in the mechanics of it and are more interested in being an engineer? Seeing as, back in your time, I would have assumed a lot more people would be, going into coal mining and actually, be encouraged more, be more encouraging to go into mines.
Yeah, energy, the primacy of energy is extremely important to understand. The thing that's given us our wonderful way of life, zooming right now, cars, airplanes, our material standard of living is we have come so far in just 200 years. A king or queen 200 years ago wouldn't have lived as well as someone on welfare in this country today. Wouldn't have lived as long, as easily, as safely, as healthily, as easily, as comfortably as someone on welfare today. That shows you how our material standards of living have improved dramatically. There have been so many benefits, and that's come from scientists who've explored nature, and then they've handed their learnings to engineers who've implemented the science. So engineers understand science, we implement it. Now, I got into engineering. I don't particularly enjoy engineering. I like the logic of it, but I didn't particularly enjoy working as an engineer. When I worked as an engineer, which was very, very briefly, it was on the people side of things, and it was on the practical application of things. And that's what I learned as a coalface miner, the need to do that. because you've got to understand that not just the pure engineering, but the translation into practical management methods and working methods and processes. So that was why it was so important for me. I could see that at Christmas holidays or summer vacation when I worked in the mines, that most senior managers in the mining industry didn't understand that, and they weren't very effective. So that was important for me. And I learned a hell of a lot. I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about, if you're a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer or an electrical engineer, you're basically working with known objects, known physical properties of known objects. With a mining, it can change dramatically underground, and that can affect people's safety, it can affect productivity, it can affect your costs of the whole business. So it was very important to understand the different ways of working. So I move after 6 months, I would move to another mine to get different experience in different conditions. So it was extremely important to me, and I loved it, because we were working in isolated groups, small teams, anywhere from 6 to 10 people, and responsible for our own safety, responsible for our own productivity. And there's a lot of satisfaction gained in working with people in a very tight team format. So it was enormously beneficial for me, enormously enjoying, satisfying, rewarding. But it helped me later on as a mine manager, because, and there'd be times when a union would come to me, a union boss would come to me and say, "We want this," and I'd say, "Well, that's not the way we did it on night shift at West Wall's End number 2 mine." And they knew just from the way I was talking that I knew what the hell I was talking about, and they'd just walk away, because most of the mine managers would get snowed by it, but not me. I wasn't falling for the bullshit. But at the same time, I understood that the key to the mine was the miner, and so I did whatever I could to support miners properly.
And what particular mines did you actually work at? I'm going to assume a lot of them were probably in regional Queensland, seeing as you spent most of your career there. But I'm also going to assume you probably spent a lot of time, in mines in WA, New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria.
Well, the underground coal mines that I worked in were in Queensland, were Collinsville number 2 mine at Collinsville in North Queensland, Saraji mine, which was the only open cut I worked in after graduation. The other mines, then I went from Queensland down into the Hunter Valley. I worked at Munmora mine. I worked at West Wall's End number 2 mine, and that was on back shifts, like night shift at West Wall's End, for example. Munmora. Then I went to Angus Place mine near Lithgow. Then I went overseas, and I worked at many mines overseas. I've lost count of them. I worked in 5 different states, open cut and underground. And I learned a very important lesson, because Peabody Coal Company took pride in being the biggest in the world, but they didn't make much money. Consolidation Coal Company was focused on productivity and safety, and they made a hell of a lot of money. So I understood the difference between production and productivity. Productivity is all about efficiency and safety. So then I came back to Australia, and I worked in, where did I go? Oh, that's right, Liddell Collier in Hunter Valley. Then I was working briefly as an engineer until I got my statutory qualifications. Then I became an under manager on afternoon shift. And an interesting thing happened to me, Francis. I was called down while I was working as an engineer at Liddell. I was called down to head office, and they said, "Well, you're bright. You've got your qualifications now. We think you should become a deputy manager." And I said, "I haven't got the experience to be a competent deputy manager." So they were quite stunned. And I said, "What I need is time as an under manager to understand how management works and how you influence and lead people." And they said, "Oh, one of the senior managers, senior superintendents supported me. The rest said, 'No, you don't need it.'" So anyway, he prevailed. And so I got a job as an under manager on afternoon shift, which is basically running the shift, 5 different crews, production crews, and what would it be, 100 or so people. And that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that, working with the miners. And then what happened? Then I became a mine manager at Mooney. And then I became mine manager at West Wall's End, which is where I worked on night shift as a miner. And then I went briefly to Stockrington mine in the Hunter Valley. And then I went to MBA school in America, Chicago, where I met my wife. And then I came back to Australia and worked in Central Queensland at Gordonstone And then I worked as a consultant for my own business, and I worked for mines, coal mines, metal mines, overseas. Where did I work overseas? New Zealand, America, Singapore, Canada, and all states of this country, and metal mines as well as coal mines. So, and I then started branching out into other forms of management and leadership in other industries. So that was pretty rewarding.
And to touch a little bit on your, as you said, your MBA in Chicago. How was that experience overall? Because studying overseas is quite a interesting and rewarding experience. Not many people do get that opportunity. So are you able to tell us a little bit more about your time in Chicago, and how long were you there for, and what did you really get up to, and why is the reason why you actually studied that MBA?
The reason I studied the MBA was that I could see the bean counters who ran our company, and the company I was a mine manager for in the Hunter Valley was Australia's largest exporter of coal at the time, I think. Yes. And they had a number of joint ventures. They were a pretty good company, but they were making dumb decisions that were driven by the bottom line, short term rather than long term. So I thought, I'm not going to be able to beat these bastards, so I'm going to join them. So I did an MBA. That was the main reason for doing the MBA. Plus, I also thought way back then that coal wouldn't have much of a future. I don't know why, because I was completely wrong. Coal has now got a better future, even with all the doom and gloom about coal mining. It's now got a wonderful future. If not in this country because of our dopey politicians, then certainly in other countries. I mean, China's heading for 5 billion tons of coal production, which is 8 to 9 times what we produce. Only a few of the suicidal developed countries are going on this crusade against coal, oil, and natural gas. So that's why I did the MBA. I picked the University of Chicago because of its very strong quantitative reputation. And one of the most, well, I got three really beneficial things out of studying at Chicago. First of all, I met my wife there. So that was
so your wife's American, or?
Yes,
or
she's
she...
American. Yeah, now she's a dual citizen. She's American and Australian. The second thing I got was a pretty good understanding of how senior people are taught, which leaves a lot to be desired. But also, the University of Chicago is very, very rigorous. And so I got a sampling of so many aspects: marketing, finance, economics, production management. The third thing I got was a wonderful professor whose name was Harry Roberts. He's no relation of mine, but he was so effective at teaching me statistics. Now, at the University of Queensland, as an engineer, we did statistics, but it was the boring statistics that everyone just passed through and just promptly forgot. We just crammed the night before, a couple of days before, and then just forgot it. But at the University of Chicago, under Professor Harry Roberts, we learned about real statistics, and that's what helped me become a pretty effective manager, because I understood how to use statistics very powerfully in a statistically sound method, but very easily. And I was able to pass those on to miners, so they would actually look after their own statistics, which is pretty unique in the coal mining industry. So that taught me the power of statistics and the power of making sure that when you teach someone something, they can use it, and that was very important. So Chicago. I enjoyed Chicago, met my wife there, as I said, and was offered jobs in some of the leading consulting companies. But when I was headhunted back to Australia to head up a large underground coal project, that was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I jumped at that.
Yeah. And that sort of experience that you gained in Chicago probably helped you as well, probably maybe a little bit in your political career as well. That sort of skills that you learn at your MBA, and I myself is probably going to consider doing an MBA into the future. So I think it's massively important, to build those sort of skills, at a top university like University of Chicago.
Well, Chicago's got a very good reputation. It's one of the top 3 schools usually in most rankings. And I was offered a scholarship to go to Columbia University, but I turned that down in favor of paying for my way at the University of Chicago. So highly did I think of it. But they ended up giving me a scholarship anyway, because based upon my grades. at the University of Chicago. But I certainly, that was my number one choice, and I was very lucky to get it. But I enjoyed it, enormously beneficial, but probably not as beneficial as working as a coal miner. But it did help me in my work in the Senate, because Pauline and I are both very insistent that when you make a decision or a policy or legislation, you base it on hard data. And sadly, that's rarely done in politics. Labor Party, Liberal Party, especially the Greens, they make decisions based on opinions, on getting headlines, on looking after vested interests, getting donations, looking after their mates. That's what is ruining this country. So what we've also seen is that when we make decisions based upon data, solid data, then the issues eventually come to us anyway, because when people go down dead ends, they eventually come onto the right path. So, it's easy for me to speak strongly about climate fraud, because we know it's a fraud, because we've done the analysis, we've looked at the data. And so same with water policy, same with energy policy. We've looked at the data, and it's all crap. So, and I understood that, because I was taught about atmospheric gases, because I had to keep people alive underground with ventilation in underground coal mines. So I understood atmospheric gases, and there's no way carbon dioxide can do what it's claimed to be doing. It's complete rubbish. But that gives me the confidence to speak very strongly on it, rather than, just stumble along.
Exactly. And Tobias, I think you were going to ask Malcolm a question a little bit more about his career as a mining manager.
Yeah. What would you say is your memorable experience as a miner manager, and and how has your experience has built his opinions on climate change?
Many experiences, Tobias, as a mine manager and as a general manager. There's so many rewarding things. There's so many anecdotes I could share with you. I remember.
Feel free to share all of them.
It would take a long time. The first mine I was manager at, they were doing something totally wrong. I won't go into the details, because you need to understand the underground coal situation. Completely wrong. It was actually fraudulent what they were doing. And they got lulled into that because they had a mine manager before me who was interested in looking good and taking shortcuts, and that compromised the mine. Then the next manager there was a young guy who's his first position as a mine manager, and he just went along with it because he didn't have the courage to stand up. I came along and said, "This is crap," and so we changed the mine totally. And as a result of that, Tobias, the mine production went down for a couple of months, and my deputy manager said that they would sack me because they wouldn't like the production going down. But within a few months after that, the production actually set all kinds of records, because the miners at the coalface said, "At last, we've got someone who understands that what we're doing is bullshit," and fixed it. And they were actually working harder, but they were invested. So that was a very good lesson to me about how, even though I was asking miners to work significantly physically harder, they wanted to, because they knew it was the right thing to do. At West Wall's End, number 2 mine, they had some very entrenched, outdated practices. And before I went there, when I was sent there, the general manager of the whole company, all 8 operations or whatever it was, he said to me, "Now, there's one particular work practice at West Wall's End. We don't want you to touch it. We don't like it. It's highly inefficient, but don't touch it." So just by working with the miners and showing them that I was supportive of them, they actually suggested removing it. So we got a number of changes through industrially, which was important, because that mine had been very much an us versus them mine. And so by working with miners, we actually turned that around to be a much more cooperative mine, a much more productive mine, a much safer mine. Some of the things that were very, when I was head of Gordonstone operations in central Queensland, we were developing the mine as well as running it, mammoth task. And we were in the early stages. We went and visited leading companies around the world, not just mines, but electrical companies, automobile companies, all kinds of industries, food production, and that was around the world as well as around Australia. And we sucked the brains of so many good people. We went to innovative companies. We saw the basic ways that they were doing management and leadership was far, far better than what was happening in Australia's coal industry. So we set remarkable new methods that were led to huge productivity advancements. And what I noticed, Tobias, was at the start of that mine, we were saying things and people were rubbishing us for them. And for about 18 months, they were rubbishing us. And then when it all started to bear fruit, they'd come and visit our mine and say, can you come and show us how you did it? So, they didn't want to get off their fat asses and work hard, and they didn't want to have to change their ways, but we forced them to by being successful. So the other thing that's important, I alluded to it before, was to be a mine manager or a general manager or an executive, you have to, I believe, serve people. But part of that service is providing discipline to those very, very, very few people who can't provide adequate self-discipline. It's not about being soft, it's about being firm, but also about being supportive.
Exactly, because if you're soft, then you don't push your workers to to the best that they can be, and to their greatest capacity. They probably won't be productive, and they'll be lazy, as you were saying from your experience as a mining manager. So I think in general it's very, very important you push your workers to be working as best as they can, because not only will they be more productive and will help the business, but they'll be able to develop their skills, learn new concepts, and become actual better workers and more intelligent people in the long run.
Right. The only word I disagree with you there is push. Leading is about drawing people forward. When you get into pushing, then you're pretty much lost. But what I found is that if you can give people a purpose and a meaning, they will respond and they will take over their own dramatic improvements. And so one of the things that I did when I was first appointed a mine manager, I just happened to be reading In Search of Excellence, which was the first of the serious business books that came out. And that was Tom Peters and Bob Waterman. They were, I think, former McKinsey employees, and they were given an assignment to go and sort out the best companies in the world based upon some solid financial criteria and operational criteria. And they had to have that success over decades. And they came down to 8 principles. I can't remember the principles at the moment. But when I was reading that book, I just basically said, oh, hell, this is what I've been believing anyway. And from that time on, I went, bugger it. I'm just going to do what I think is right and what in my gut is right. My intuition says is right. My heart says is right. And that's what I learned to then do things that were quite controversial, do things that were not the run of the mill, but just I believed in it. But of course, I do my homework as well. But the importance of people is just so important. And we as management of this country, in this country, generally doesn't understand that. They pay lip service to it, and they come up with mission statements and values and charters and all the rest of the bullshit. But it is just bullshit. And most workers are just looking at that saying, this is crap. But you've got to have a really solid feel for what people need in terms of universal human needs to do a good job. They need a sense of belonging. They need a sense of commitment, a sense of purpose. They need to be cared for. They need to be treated as humans who have got a brain and a heart. And that's very important.
Totally agree with you there, Matt. Senator, totally agree with you there. So on the topic of pushing people, not necessarily pushing people, but leading people to their greatest success. Who's someone in your eyes that would be your political role model, or that you try and follow, that can lead you to becoming a successful politician, or has led you to become a successful politician?
My mother and father, for a start, even though they weren't politically involved, they were politically informed. What they tell me, of course, they really drove into me the need to be truthful at all times. That's really important. Politicians have enormous pressure on us to fib a little bit, squib a little bit, distort, misrepresent, try and look good rather than do good. And that's corroding our whole political system in this country. Politicians from both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party who want to look good, not do good. Mum and Dad for values. Pauline Hanson, without a doubt, she's intelligent. She's clever. She's cunning in a nice sense of the word. I don't mean in any sense dishonest. She's extremely honest. She's got very high integrity. She's highly capable. People say that she loves a fight. She doesn't like the fight. But there's one thing she likes less, and that's running away from a fight. She will always face up to her responsibilities. Very high standards of accountability. Joe Bjelke-Petersen was another one who I had a lot of regard for. I watched him in Queensland because I was living in Queensland at the time, and that's a time when I would work at 6 months at a mine, then move on. So every 6 months I would come home to Brisbane with my family, and I'd learn more about Joe Bjelke-Petersen. A marvelous person. He balanced the budgets, he cut taxes, developed the state, opened up the coal industry, opened up central Queensland, built infrastructure, dams, railroads, did a marvelous job. And it was funny because he would be very staunchly pro-Queensland and very staunchly anti-central government. Didn't matter whether it's Labor, federal government, or Liberal, he opposed them because they were centralising things, and that was doing Queensland damage. And I remember going to parties in New South Wales. I was only young, and people would talk out about this hick from Queensland, Joe Bjelke-Petersen. And then they'd come in public. That's what they'd do, and as a group. And then they'd come over to me and say, "I wish he was down here." So I could see that it was fashionable to bag Joe Bjelke-Petersen, but most people respected him highly. The other one that's influenced me enormously is Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek from the Austrian School of Economics. Their books have just been phenomenal.
And that's quite interesting as well that Joe Bjelke-Petersen's got a very back in the day, he was a very successful politician, did a very good job for Queensland for quite a long period of time. And a lot of people do talk a lot about the end and the corruption sort of stuff that did pop up in those trials around the police and that sort of thing. But overall, if you forget about all those sort of stuff and those scandals that came towards the end of his reign as Premier, he was there for 15 to 16 years as the Premier of Queensland. And to be there for such a long period of time, you've got to be a successful and you've got to be a people person. You've got to be someone that's popular. So, Joe Bjelke-Petersen, even in my mind, sometimes it is a quite, remarkable politician in the way that he did, in the way that he presented himself and the way that he brought Queensland forward and, to what Queensland is today in terms of the mining industry, in terms of natural resources.
Yes, I disagree with you in the corruption. There's no doubt there was corruption amongst some of his cabinet ministers, but I don't think he was involved in it. Hinds was notoriously corrupt from what we can work out. Joe Bjelke-Petersen was smeared because he was the Premier, but I don't think he was directly corrupt at all. I know someone who's worked for Joe in the past, and he said, no, he was fine. He was a good man. But Joe came here from New Zealand, I think, as a boy. And
I think he's Danish as well.
Yes,
Danish
that's
descent.
right. Hard work, good work ethic. I think he was a Lutheran, very staunch Lutheran, I think, but certainly a Christian. He had very solid views, and he didn't mind telling people his views. He didn't mind being called out for them, but he was very proud of them. Unshakable faith. He self-made, and I think that he had conviction, and it didn't matter if everyone disagreed with him. If he thought it was right, after consulting people, if he thought it was right, then he did it, and that's what Queensland needed. That's good leadership, and he held his cabinet together. He's the longest serving Premier in our history, I think. Quite remarkable.
Yeah, it is quite remarkable. I can double check actually how many years he did serve as Premier, but it's quite remarkable, as I was saying before, to be a Premier of a state for nearly over 19 years as premier straight
Yeah.
without any breaks. And yeah, that is quite remarkable and quite an astonishing feat to have. So, in my opinion as well, he'd be a strong political role model and idol for, any sort of person that wants to have a long and lasting career in politics. So yeah, we'll, as you were saying,
I agree. In our office in Canberra, the foyer, we have a photo of Joe Bjelke-Petersen, a photo of Pauline Hanson, by choice. Not she didn't insist on that. She gets very embarrassed with congratulatory comments, and a photo of the Queen's coronation, because I thought the Queen did a remarkable job.
Yeah. I think we'll move on now to our next question for you, Senator. This comes from Tobias.
Yeah, what made you run in the 2016 federal election for One Nation, and what made you join the One Nation Party?
Okay, I knew very little about the political parties. The only party I knew something about, and that was media driven, was the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. That was from a distance. So I'd been campaigning as a volunteer at my own cost, and foregoing income, at a crucial time in my life, in my 50s, which is when we earn most of our money as humans, because of this climate fraud, because of my studying of atmospheric gases. I knew that it was complete garbage and it was highly destructive. So I was speaking around the country at different places around the country at my own cost against the climate fraud. Pauline Hanson heard me speak, heard about me. She asked me to speak at a forum in Gatton. She liked what I had to say. She said she wanted someone strong standing beside her in the Senate if she got in. So she asked me to consider becoming a candidate in the Senate. So I said, well, I have to ask my wife first. So I asked my wife and she said, go for it. So then I said to Pauline, my wife's okay. And she said, well, sign up then, let's go. And I said, nah, we're going to have a talk first because I want to make sure I understand what you expect and the past history of One Nation. And because it had phenomenal growth. And then it was hijacked by people from the Liberal Party and Labor Party to put a spear into it because it was the only alternative to the Liberal Labor Uniparty. And they could not afford to have real competition. So they nobbled Pauline, put her in jail, called her a racist, which is a complete lie because there's nothing more sinister in Australia than being a racist, and she's not. So they tried to damage her. The media tore her to shreds, misrepresented her. So I wanted to find out why. And then I realized that no one could have managed the growth that Pauline was faced with in the One Nation Party in 1998. So taken completely out of her control, sabotaged, and so I could see she was expecting a conversation for an hour or so, and we had almost 12 hours at her place, and I thought this woman really knows her stuff. So I then agreed to join One Nation and stand in the Senate. And because Malcolm Turnbull called a double dissolution, I fluked my way into the Senate. I was the last one elected in Queensland. If it hadn't been a double dissolution, there's no way I would have got in. Then I worked for about 14 months in the Senate, and that was enough time for people to see who I really was. And so when I got knocked out with dual citizenship, I came back 18 months later, roughly, and won my own spot into the Senate in One Nation, and that's where I've been ever since. So that's why I joined One Nation. I had a very, very good friend who was quite a bit older than I was, and he was telling me how good Pauline was. He'd met Pauline, he'd supported her, he'd followed her, and John was extremely truthful, extremely astute. For him to recommend One Nation meant a lot. So he said it was the only hope we have of stopping the Uni Party and the Labor Party and the Liberal Party selling us out to the globalists. So I found everything he said to be true. So I signed up, and I've been very, very proud and pleased to be part of One Nation. Very proud.
Yeah, and you got recently re-elected again in 2022. I do
No, that
believe
was Pauline. That was
oh,
Pauline.
so 2020. So you were going up for election, sorry, in 2025.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, so coming up to an election year now. So if you do get elected again, Senator, you'll probably be there for until 2031, which is going to be quite a long Senate term. So all the best for you in your election next year.
Thank you.
And yeah, finally, we'll move on to our final question for you, Senator. So finally, what's some advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university or high school?
Well, this question you sent to me, I thought, okay, the first thing I'm going to write is truth. Always tell the truth. Sometimes it hurts you in politics. Sometimes it hurts you in senior management, which is a very sad indictment of management and politics. But always tell the truth, because it might hurt you short term, but long term it always pays off. And then I thought, oh, hang on, there's more things. Get some practical experience. Get out and work in a business as a worker. Learn from the ground floor up. And what you learn about workers and about people in one industry is quite often portable or transportable to another industry. And then I thought, hang on a minute, there's another thing, and that's the word process. Don't look at the traditional accounting systems by themselves. They will give a distorted picture. Instead, look at the process-based statistics to understand the process itself. What a lot of managers get hopelessly mixed up in is that they look at the outcomes and they try to fiddle with the process without understanding the process, and that leads to worse outcomes, but they think they're doing the right thing. If you look at the process and you measure the process as well as the outcomes, the results, then you get a better understanding, you make better decisions. That leads to the next point. Try to understand data, or if you can, get the data. And sometimes qualitative things, Francis, can be measured if you interpret them properly. And so always get data. The next thing I came up, see, you asked me that simple question, but there are so many things. You said one thing and I couldn't get one thing. So the next thing is understand universal human needs, because if you focus on needs as a politician, if you focus on needs as a chief executive, if you focus on needs as an accountant, then you understand what is the purpose of your party, what is the purpose of your company. And the next one I wrote down, I'm just looking at the list here, was explore
Pretty
self.
long list there, Senator.
Explore, it is, but I mean, they just kept bubbling out, and I defy anyone. If I've got to pick one, I'll tell you which one it is in a minute. But explore self. I did a wonderful thing called the Hoffman process, which was 8 days of intensive work. My wife did the same. That was life-changing. It opened my mind up to things beyond rational thinking, to what really drives us. Then I did Vipassana meditation as a result of that, having my eyes opened. And Vipassana meditation was one of the toughest things I've ever done. I did the standard course of the Outward Bound course as well, which was thoroughly recommended. So I would do that again. But Vipassana, really, I would not survive in the Senate, because I take things very seriously. I would not survive in the Senate if it hadn't been for Vipassana. But of all those things, the most important is tell the truth.
I actually could completely agree with you there, because at the end of the day, if you're hiding yourself and you're not telling the exact truth, you know, I always like to say there's, at the end of the day, if you live your life in a way that's not truthful, when you die, you'll face the consequences of that.
Yeah, and you face the
So
consequences along the way anyway. But
exactly.
sometimes it hurts to tell the truth short term, but never long term.
Exactly. And those are all our questions then for you, Senator. So I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been nearly an hour and a half, one of our longer episodes, but I do really appreciate you coming on and speaking to us and listening towards your certain views in your career in the mining industry. Your political idol, talking about Joe Jockey Peterson and Pauline Hanson while you joined One Nation, and some advice you'd give to students in 2024. So me and Tobias and all our listeners are very, very appreciative of you coming on and sharing your story.
You're most welcome, and keep going with what you're doing, because the mouthpiece media, the globalist media, the Big Brother media is hopeless. It's causing our problems. It's hiding the real issues from people. So we need independent podcasters like yourself to get the word out. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you for the invitation.